Irish Breakdown Nation. It is time for the IB Nation Sports Talk. My name is Brian Driscoll. I am guest hosting for Sean Stiers. He will be out tonight. He will be back tomorrow, however. We're going to have a couple shows tomorrow night, actually, because Sean, tomorrow night, this is Sean Davis, the recruiting analyst at Irish Breakdown, also co-host of the Lucky Lefty podcast. And tomorrow night's the first installment of the college football playoff rankings. And so we're going to talk a little bit about that at the end of the show tonight. We'll also have a show after the rankings tomorrow night, which will follow the IB Nation Sports Talk show. But tonight, Sean, you and I are going to talk Notre Dame Clemson.
Yeah.
And we're going to just discuss the opportunity that Notre Dame has in front of it. We'll get into some of the comments that Coach Freeman made today about the Notre Dame Clemson game. And then we're also going to discuss comments he made about Brian Mason and what they mean about Brian Mason, but then also what maybe they could mean for some other coaches on the Notre Dame staff and if they could apply similar principles to their job. So, I mean, Sean, it's number 5 Clemson. You know, it's the team that for the last 6-7 seasons has been the Alabama and Clemson were it, right? They were the two consistent programs. Clemson had a, down year last year at 10-3. There's a lot of teams that would like to have a down 10 at the year at 10-3.
Yeah.
But, they're back to being one of the better teams in the country. I don't think they're fully back to being what they were from 15 to 18, but still a really good opponent, a really good football team, and a big, big test for Notre Dame and a big opportunity for Notre Dame because let's be honest, Saturday against Syracuse was a great win. I mean, you beat a ranked team, you win on the road. It was great, but it doesn't erase what has been up to this point in time, a disappointing beginning to the season. You follow that up with a win over Clemson, Sean, and all of a sudden the narrative about this football team starts to change. And you start to say, okay, now we see why, Marcus Freeman is the head coach. And now you see what this team is capable of. Now you see, oh, yeah, it wasn't about the talent. Lose this game, and all of a sudden we're kind of back to where we were a couple weeks ago. So that's the opportunity. And then, of course, there's the recruiting implications. You and Ryan Roberts had a show today at Irish Breakdown. We won't regurgitate that because it was a great show. Listen to that one if you didn't check it out. Tons of big-time recruits on campus. Great recruiting momentum opportunity for Notre Dame as well, Sean. So, I mean, Coach Freeman said it today, right? This is why you come to Notre Dame. It's for games like this.
It's one of the things we pointed out in talking about the Syracuse game. Like, would Syracuse be ready for the moment? Because Notre Dame has a moment every week. Either they're in a big game or they are someone's big game every time they step on the field. And when you come to Notre Dame, that becomes the norm. It's no different than Clemson coming to town. Like Marcus Freeman said, this is what we do. This is why you come here. And that is the message to the recruits that will show up. Like, this is what it is. Like, you're here for one day, but it's a big game every week at Notre Dame. We are Notre Dame. And it's going to be a challenge, but it becomes probably a different type of challenge than I think even the players expected. And what I mean by that is that I believe the players probably expected to be 7-1, 8-0 going into this matchup, if you ask them honestly, in the summertime. But unfortunately, that's not the record. But the importance of the game and the gravity of the game for the success of the season, even though there have been some slip-ups, still remains. And without question, you win this game and you start building towards November, and that big matchup at the end of November becomes even bigger. And now you're talking about, after having disappointing losses, a sweep in November going into a big-time bowl game, you feel pretty good about a first-year head coach that has gained a lot of experience. Brian, you know what? There's a phrase, that we are familiar with from a biblical standpoint, like, you need go through Samaria, right? There are certain paths that you have to take. But a long term, I think everyone would want this team to be undefeated.
Sure.
Have an outside chance for the college football playoff. But what we've seen gained in experience and toughness from the head coach and the foundation of things being established, for the program moving forward, Notre Dame might have had to go through something like this season. No, we don't like the fact that it is at 5-3 right now. Maybe they could have gone through some of these things at 6-2 without the loss to Stanford, or 7-1. But either way, I think the way things are as it sits today goes into what you just talked about. There's an opportunity here that is right before this team, this coaching staff, and this program, and they should take full advantage of it because it's right there for the taking. It's not something that's without out of their reach.
Sure.
Like, it's right there.
Right.
It's right there. Yeah, Clemson's a good team, but as Marcus Freeman said, we're a good team too.
Right. Sean, when you talk about this game and you talk about what Coach Freeman has been through this season and what he's learned, look, there were mistakes that were made, right? Notre Dame, no matter what happens between now and the end of the season, Notre Dame will not be the team they should have been, big picture.
Mm-hmm.
But as you stated so well, there are times you can say, look, this isn't how we wanted it to go, but it's how it went. And here's what we learned from it. We didn't expect it to happen this way. We didn't want it to happen this way. I'll never be someone that says, looking back, I'm glad they lost 3 games. No, I'm not going to say that. What I'm going to say is, boy, I'm glad they learned the right lessons from those 3 games. And not every coach does. Not every coach goes through those type of experiences and says, hey, this is the correct lessons to learn. As we talked in the Syracuse postgame show, you started to see the fingerprints of Marcus Freeman more on the entire nature of the football team. And now all of a sudden the offense and defense started looking a little bit more like what the special teams has looked like all season. And we'll talk about that a little bit.
Yeah.
But it's one of those things where, you don't want to go through it. You don't want it to be that way. But if you learn the right lessons from it, it can make you stronger than you otherwise would have, right? You don't really know how you're going to respond to being tested with fire until you're tested with fire, right? You don't know how you're going to handle that adversity until you actually have to experience adversity. And he talked about that a little bit today. And we're not going to play that part of the press conference because we're only allowed to show 3 minutes of a press conference per rules. But he talked about, yes, winning is like somebody asked him about learning from the game. And he talked about, you want to learn from the game. But then he went right into basically talking about how, but we got to make sure we don't lose sight of the lessons we learned from the failures. And I thought that was really savvy. Like, you can't just say, oh, we've won, we've arrived.
Yeah.
Say, hey, you get a little too big for your britches. Hey, I got Stanford tape from like 2 weeks ago that I can pop in for you real quick. If you think you've arrived, you know what I mean? And you don't think you got to put in the work today or whatever the case may be. So I think those are important things to look at and say, winning the rest of the way doesn't absolve the team of the losses to Marshall and to Stanford. Right. Or the struggles to beat some other teams. But what it does is that, okay, you're now back on track. The path was this to a championship. This was the path you were on, right? And you took a little detour. You got a little bit lost, but you found your way back on, and you're back on track. May not be this year, but it can be for next year. And I do think that how you finish the season is important, Sean.
Absolutely.
We've seen this a lot. I mean, we've talked a lot about USC in 2016, and by the end of the year, nobody wanted to play USC in 2016. Well, Notre Dame has a chance to kind of be that team. They're not that team right now. They're not that team because of what they did to Stanford. They're not. I mean, they should have beat Stanford. I mean, let's be real about this. The win over Stanford was great. Love it. You went on the road. You beat a ranked team. But if Notre Dame was the team they were supposed to be, they would have been ranked higher than Stanford and would have been favored against Stanford. I mean, they would have been, right? If they'd have beat Marshall and Stanford, Syracuse. When they went in to play Syracuse last weekend, Notre Dame would have been ranked higher. They'd have been a top 10 team, only would have lost to Ohio State, and they'd have been favored to win, right? So you aren't that team yet. This is the opportunity to say, okay, yes, we're back on track. We're back on track, and we're becoming that team. And if you don't win, it's at the point now where I know this is year 1 of Coach Freeman's tenure, but this is year 13 of a rebuilding experience that's been going on for a while. And part of the frustration with the previous coach was, I'm sick of almost winning those games.
Mm-hmm.
Right? It's time to win those games. And that's the other part of this, Sean, is the opportunity to go out and beat a team like Clemson with no excuses. Right? No, well, they didn't have their starting quarterback, and they didn't have this guy, and they didn't have that guy, and then a month later they beat you in the ACC title game. You have a chance now to beat them, and there's nothing they can do about it until next year, when you've got to go to their place. So it's a tremendous opportunity from that regard. It's a great confidence builder because I feel like, I don't want to say, like you and I were talking yesterday and about this. I don't want to say that there's no way Navy and Boston College can beat Notre Dame because Marshall and Stanford beat Notre Dame, right?
Right, right.
But what I meant was, what I'm saying about what I feel about it is, if you beat Clemson and Syracuse back to back, then that team that lost to Marshall and Stanford, that team that lacked confidence, that team that lacked the emotion, that team that lacked the fire, the direction, the discipline, the leadership, and all those things that cause you to lose those games, that team dies, because that team has to die in order to be the team that can beat Syracuse and Stanford and Clemson in back-to-back games. And that's my point. And I think that team will be gone, and then we'll see what Notre Dame is the rest of the way. And that's kind of what this opportunity presents as well. And then finally, of course, Sean, the perception that is there for Marcus Freeman, that is there for this Notre Dame program. If you beat Clemson in a game where it's not a fluky game or something like that, where you just go out like, you know what, Notre Dame was better that day, then that's that final thing to say, okay, Marcus Freeman has officially arrived as a head coach. He went through the ups and downs at Notre Dame, but he stepped up after Stanford. He made the changes. He did what was needed to be done. And now this team is finally where it should have been. It took a little longer than it should have, but the point is they're there.
I don't know about you, but I would take some flukiness. I'm cool with that.
No, I'll take a win no matter what.
That bounces off of two Clemson guys into the hand of a Notre Dame receiver.
I will take a win no matter what. My comment is more of the perception of Notre Dame.
Yeah, I totally get what you're saying.
Would be different. But yeah, for me personally, I'm taking a win however I can get it.
There's
no doubt about it.
That this is, because if we're honest, as much as they would say no if you asked them publicly, I think they put a lot of energy into that Ohio State game.
Sure.
And I think the Ohio State loss was a letdown of sorts. And I don't think – I'm not going to say they weren't prepared, because they had a fourth quarter lead against Marshall.
Right.
Did they play well? No. But at some point, you can forget what got you here. Right? Yeah. And you can think that it just is going to happen. Right? I don't think I think we all were watching that Marshall game saying, okay, they're about to take over. Okay, they're about to take over. Okay, they had the ball in Marshall territory up 3. They're about to go down and score and take over.
Sure.
And they didn't do what was necessary to finish the task. And that was a tough lesson. That's a tough lesson. I think a lot of the leaders, Jared Patterson took it hard. Isaiah Foskey took it hard. And a lot of those leaders, along with the players on the rock, they had to look themselves in the mirror. They had to
I think it took them a while to figure themselves out, Sean.
Yes. You're right. You're absolutely right. And also, I think we're starting to see big picture. I think we're starting to see some buy-in to some of the things they're being asked to do. And Clemson is going to go a long way to kind of verifying.
Correct.
That.
Or showing, hey, you just out-talented Syracuse. That's all you did.
Yeah.
Right? Syracuse's quarterback, because if you lose to Clemson as well, Syracuse's quarterback was beat up. He didn't play second half. You got that pick 6 early, and that kind of threw them off. And it was just a good day for you and a bad day for them. But you're still 5-4, and you still lost to Marshall, and you still lost to Stanford, and you don't have a win that negates those losses. And that's the thing. That's the difference between Clemson and Stanford, or Syracuse. I don't know why I keep saying Stanford. But you look at Clemson, you look at Syracuse, and this is two teams that played each other tough a couple weeks ago. They're very similar in style. Yep. They're built differently. Clemson's bigger and, different type of personnel, but they're really good defensive teams that want to run the football and not turn it over on offense. I mean, there's a lot of similarities between Clemson and Syracuse, which is why that game between those two teams was so close and hard fought, is they're very similar teams. And, but perception-wise, is Clemson is here and Syracuse is here and Notre Dame is here and Notre Dame is trying to get to here.
Yeah.
And I think that's what this is, because this is still one of the elite teams in college football. Are they what they were with Deshaun and Trevor? No, they're not. But they're still one of the elite teams. They're still a team that's 18-3 the last 2 years.
Yeah.
And has won, I mean, how many games in a row, right? I mean, because they started off like 2-3 last year. I mean, Clemson's won. I mean, look at their 21 schedule. They won their last 6 games in a row. And then they've obviously started the season off 8 in a row. So we're winning 14 games in a row. You know, they're not the team they were, but they're still pretty good. And, you know, we're going to spend all week diving into the matchup and all that kind of stuff, but it's still Clemson. And they're still undefeated. They're still the number 5 team in the country. I'm actually a little surprised they're as low as they are. They got Louisville. I mean, after this, they got Louisville at home, Miami at home, and South Carolina at home. That's probably a 3-0 finish to the season.
Absolutely.
So you finish this year with beating the ACC. I mean, here's another thing too, Sean. If things go the way that they're going right now, there's an opportunity for Notre Dame to say, we beat the ACC Atlantic champ at home. We beat the ACC Coastal champ on the road.
Yeah.
Now, Clemson right now is 6-0 in conference. Syracuse is 3-1. The next 2 best records in the league are Florida State and Louisville at 3-3 apiece. The only team with a shot to knock Clemson off of the Atlantic Division title is Syracuse, but they would need Clemson to lose twice at home to Miami and who did I just say? It was Miami and Louisville. They would literally need it. Clemson only has to win one of their next 2 games after Notre Dame because the Notre Dame game doesn't matter. Yeah. 2 of Clemson's final 4 games are non-conference games. If Clemson beats one of Miami or Louisville, they clinch the Coastal because if they tie with Syracuse, they win the head-to-head.
Yeah.
And then you look at the Coastal Division. North Carolina is currently 4-0 in that division. The next best teams, Duke and Miami are tied at 2-2. Now, North Carolina's already beaten Miami. They've already beaten Duke. So, again, those teams would need North Carolina to lose 3 times, and they play at Virginia, at Wake Forest, home against Georgia Tech, home against NC State. They would literally need North Carolina to lose 3 times because North Carolina would likely have the head-to-head again. And now that's, of course, unless Miami and Duke both run the table, then there's a 3-way tie. But the odds of that happening right now based on the schedules are not high. No. So there's a good chance that North Carolina and Clemson are going to be the ACC representatives for the ACC title, and Notre Dame can say we beat both of them.
Honestly, that's for me at this point. That would be a pick'em game for me in that ACC championship game.
Oh yes, that'd be a pick'em for me. That Carolina receiving core against this Clemson
secondary.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. Very interesting matchup, and like you said, the resume. Look, Notre Dame has no one to blame but themselves. This resume should have been very impressive at 7-1 going into this week. Very impressive, right? Yep. Ohio State, North Carolina win, Syracuse win. At least 2 big wins. 7-1, you lost to Ohio State, okay. If you come away with the victory against Ohio State, you're undefeated. But like you said, that's water under the bridge right now.
Right.
You got bigger fish to fry.
Yeah.
And that's closing out this season and building.
Yeah.
Continue to add to the foundation, right? The foundation is by percentage is the most expensive thing in building a home, right? Especially if you want a really good one. I think it's somewhere like 8 to 10% of the home's total cost. But it's the most important, right? Because if you mess up the foundation, you pretty much have to tear everything down if it's a bad foundation. You have a great foundation and you have some imperfections, some windows here or a wall here. Okay, we can deal with that. And in laying the foundation, like we said, if they had to go through this to lay a good foundation for the program moving forward, then okay. Like, we don't like it. Right. We wish we didn't have to experience the tough losses. But you know what? brighter days are ahead.
Sure.
And one of those brighter days could end up being Saturday night around 11 o'clock.
And that's the opportunity here, Sean, right? Notre Dame will be defined more by what it does from here to the end of November.
Absolutely.
Than what it was in September to October. Now, those will always be part of the conversation, because then there'll be the question of what could have been. But I would much rather deal with the what could have been conversations because you beat Clemson and USC than the 7-5 football season and it's a disappointing year, because we're looking at potentially 9-3 or 7-5. I mean, that's really like a realistic look at it. Those are very different things. 8-4 versus 9-3, very different in my opinion, right? But the perception of this football team at 9-3 would be so much greater with wins over Clemson and USC than if this team went 9-3 but lost to Ohio State, beat Marshall, beat Stanford, lost to Clemson, lost to USC. Because then you're just a Brian Kelly coach team again, right? Because that's what Kelly's record would have been against this kind of schedule. That's what it always had been in the past. You lose to the teams that are ranked high. You don't beat those teams, right? And so that you look at it and say, okay, I mean, what was the stat that you said? If they beat Clemson this Saturday, they'll have more top 25 wins than what Brian Kelly had the last 2 years combined.
Yeah.
Right? That's what the opportunity is. And now your perception has changed. And the point is, doesn't excuse the losses. I want people to understand that. This is not what we're trying to do here. We don't do that here. It doesn't excuse the losses. But what it says is we have learned from those losses and we've come out stronger. And that's how you finish the season. And so I think those are the things that's the opportunity that's in front of Notre Dame today. And I want to play Coach Freeman's comments from today, Sean, and just so you can kind of hear him talking about in two different sections of the show, of him talking about just here's the opportunities that's in front of the team when it comes to playing Clemson. And we're going to we'll talk about what he says, but there's some very interesting things that he said. So I'm going to just play that here now.
That's what you get when you get a team like Notre Dame and Clemson. It's a heavyweight battle, and two great historic programs that get to go and clash it out. That it's probably going to be one of those games that come down to the last couple series and who executes the most. But I remember Ian Book throwing that long pass, I think to Avery Davis. Yeah. Right. There's a couple plays that just stick out in my mind. I know that at the end of the game that they got after the quarterback a little bit, didn't give him a chance to really throw the ball in that second overtime. And I'm just thinking back, like there's plays as I'm sitting here talking to you, like just like, oh man, I remember that play, And I think did Dorr have a big hit? I think I remember him knocking somebody. Bramlett, not Dorr, Bramlett, yeah. Yeah, like he rocked somebody. I'm like, man, they got a punter that's he's physical, man. So there's some, as we're talking, like there's just plays that come to my mind, but I know at the end of the game, Notre Dame was victorious. I know we got a battle coming ahead, a tall task coming ahead of us, but listen, man, I want our guys to saying you're Notre Dame, right? And that, you know what, this is what we do. We play in big games like this. It's not a David versus Goliath. This is a heavyweight fight. And we got a dang good football team that I've always said it, man. When we do exactly what we're supposed to do, we're a good enough football team to win every game we play. But you know what? We have to do that because we've seen if we don't execute, we don't do our job, we're not going to be victorious. And you've seen that in some of the games we played this year. So this isn't a David versus Goliath. This is Notre Dame versus Clemson, two powerhouse, two blue blood programs that are going to go battle Saturday night here in Notre Dame Stadium.
Sean, I thought his comments were important because now it's one thing for him to say it. Okay, that's fine. It's good. The importance is if that's the attitude that he then puts onto his team during the week of practice. Hey, fellas, this is not a team. Because here's the danger. Clemson is so good, and this is how good, they're this and they're that, and we got to play the perfect game. And if we don't play the perfect game, we can't beat them. Number one, that's you're talking yourself down, number one. Number two, you're putting this really crazy expectations of perfection. And if you don't come out right away and you're hot and blazing, then you can't beat that team. I felt the 2020 team needed to kind of be that. They needed to kind of come out and sort of play close to the perfect game to beat Clemson. That's not the reality of these two teams now. And I think that's the point that he's got to get across to the players, Sean, is, hey, fellas, you don't have to be perfect. We don't have to play out of our minds to beat Clemson because Clemson's up here and we're down here. We're Notre Dame. We're on the same level with them. We're the same. We're every bit as good as they are. That's something, even if deep down you don't necessarily believe that, that's got to be the message. I actually do believe that, and we'll get into the matchups of this particular game during the week of our shows and explain why we see that. But it's one of those things where you say, hey, listen, it's the mentality of we just go play our game. And he talked later in the show, he made a comment like, look, it's just do your job every single play. You don't have to, Isaiah Foskey, you don't have to play out of your mind. Just do your job every play. Drew Pine, we don't need you to be Trevor Lawrence. Just do your job every play. And if you make a mistake, bounce back and get it on the next play. You have to have that mentality in this game, because if you put this pressure of we have to play this perfect game to beat them, then you're going to be you're going to be so tight that you're just not going to be able to win this game. And the first time some adversity hits, you're just, bam, we're done. We're done. And that's been that real tight mentality we've seen from this team so many times in these type of matchups. And that's what has to be different. It's like, guys, you're Notre Dame. You don't have to worry about Clemson. You're Notre Dame. Do your job. Do your job. And I really like that message. It was important because, as you responded on Twitter to that comment, Sean, Marcus Freeman should not be allowing the conversation of, the David versus Goliath, this big, it's an upset simply from where the standings are and what the spread is because of we didn't handle our business going in between, coming in. But as he said in the thing, and early in the podcast says, but we are that team. So he keeps reiterating his football team. He said it after Syracuse. We are a darn good football team.
Yeah.
And he's not letting them feel sorry for themselves. We are a darn good football team. You've got to believe that, though. And that belief is how you go out and play. And that's how a team shows up on the road against a really good Syracuse team who just outplayed Clemson for a big chunk of that game at Clemson. How Notre Dame walked on that field and said, I don't care what you did against Clemson. We're Notre Dame, you're Syracuse. Yeah. And now we're going to show you for 60 minutes what that means.
Yeah.
And that's the mentality this team needs against Clemson.
And I'm sure IB Nation is going to have that shown to them throughout the week with all of the shows that we're going to do with the different matchups. When you start looking at the matchup of this game, you're going to recognize, as we've been saying, this is not the Trevor Lawrence, Deshaun Watson Clemson team. Good team.
Yes, very good team.
But not as deep, very talented, front seven on defense, questionable positions on the offensive line, questionable quarterback play. It's a lot of flaws that Dabo himself is trying to figure out coming to this matchup, which is probably beneficial that they will be coming off a bye week for them because they've had time to work on the things that they need to work on. But this is what I love about this matchup. And it takes me back to 2020. They look like the bully. They sound like the bully. But they got to prove to us that they're the bully. Because we're not running. We got these big boys eating. They ate against Syracuse. We're going to try and make them eat against you. We're not coming with tricks. We're coming straight ahead.
Right.
And we're going to run the ball. If you stop us, congratulations.
Yeah.
But you're not going to stop us from running. We're running the ball. That's what we're doing.
Right.
Have fun. Because I don't know how cold it's going to be.
Not very.
It's going to be a physical. Bring your lunch pail. Tell your mama to turn her face from the TV because it's going to get ugly. And the last time that Notre Dame faced this team, they dominated the physical aspect of the game 6 of the 8 quarters in 2020. And I don't think the offensive line is as good as this offensive line, in my opinion. I don't think they were coached as good as this offensive line is going to be coached against Clemson. Now, it's debatable whether or not this Clemson defense is better than that defensive front. Because most of these guys that are here now were babies
in
that game. freshmen, sophomore, and now they're juniors and seniors. So that's debatable. But my point is, the standard has been set. They can show them on film. We can push them around. We've done it. We've been able to be successful being physical against this defense and this defensive front. And as Marcus Freeman said today, my guys are ready. My guys are ready.
Right.
Like I have them right where I want them mentally. My guys are ready. Now we just have to go execute. Right. That's it. Because we're ready as a team. And that is for him to feel like he has gotten his team to that point. And Stanford was literally just, it feels like yesterday, like the low of Stanford. And for him to feel like he has his team ready to go on the Monday before the game, he's telling you the Monday before the game, they're ready. We're ready.
Yeah.
That's an accomplishment. And that goes to not just Marcus Freeman and the coaches. The players deserve credit for that as well.
Yeah.
Because everyone had to come together.
Because they got to answer the bell. Absolutely. You can challenge them all you want.
Absolutely.
And you can do all the right things. And I mean, this is where the line between coaching and playing comes in. And on this particular show, and a lot of it's because of our backgrounds and the things that we believe in, is things that I believe in, that the guys that are on the show with me, we have similar philosophies on football. And that is, you can talk about the Jimmies and the Joes, but I could spend an entire hour talking about examples of teams that went from mediocre to really good with the same exact dudes. The only thing that changed was coaching or a mindset or whatever the case may be, right? Notre Dame does not win a championship in 1988 if Jerry Faust is still the head football coach, right? I mean, you can talk about the dudes all you want, right? And Jerry Faust recruited Tim Brown and a lot of the dudes that were on the 1988 national title team, not some of the younger guys, but a lot of the older guys. I mean, a lot of the guys on defense were Jerry Faust recruits, at least in the front seven anyway. And so you look at it, Sean, and you say, it's got to come to the coaches have to set the plan. They have to set the mentality, the mindset. They have to create the culture, the environment for players to grow and develop and all that. But then there comes a point in time where I can take you only so far. Now it's time for you to go do it. And I think that's a big piece to this thing is, if you can create the right environment. And I think it's important for him to take that mindset too, Sean, because if you do, because you could go into this game. There's another approach that Coach Freeman could have taken, and hear me out on this. He could have gone into this game and been like, "Hey, we're this big underdog. Nobody believes in us. Nobody thinks we can play. We've got this giant juggernaut." And I think to a degree that's probably going to happen, but not from the disrespect nature of it, but you're trying to hype the opponent up so much in an attempt to try to take the pressure off of your team. Right. And I don't love that approach, but it's an understandable one. What I liked about it is because I think the approach that he's taking is, hey guys, you don't have to put all this pressure on yourselves to play above and beyond. You just have to be you. And that's the mindset, because I'm going to say this, and Saturday is going to be the same exact story. In 2020, when you took Trevor Lawrence out of that lineup, what we all realized is Notre Dame and Clemson are two very similar football teams.
Very similar programs.
Very similar teams. Both really good in the trenches. Both had really good defensive lines. Notre Dame had a little bit of a better offensive line. Clemson had a great playmaker on the second and third level. Notre Dame had a great playmaker on the second and third level. Both had strengths at different places. Notre Dame had a great safety. Clemson had maybe a better corner. Both had big-time playmakers, at different positions. And Notre Dame had Kyron Williams at running back. They had, they had Kyron Williams at Travis Etienne. I keep wanting to say the brother's name that's now playing for Florida. You had talent at tight end. You had Michael Mayer as a freshman. You had Tommy Trumbull, who was a high draft pick. You had Javon McKinley, who made some big plays. And then you had an experienced quarterback in Ian Book against a young kid making his second career start. And on that particular day, Notre Dame's quarterback made more plays in crunch time. Now, also almost lost the game with that fumble, but then recovered from the fumble and went and led them down late on a big-time touchdown drive and made the plays that he needed to make. Then you fast forward a month later, and you're playing in the championship game, and now Trevor Lawrence was back, and all of a sudden they look like two completely different football teams.
Yeah.
And so that's still going to be an element to Saturday, right? I think the difference now, however, is number one, Drew Pine has to play better. We'll get into that during the week. But number two is the margin for error outside of quarterback is much smaller for Notre Dame now than it was 2 years ago, because the other team doesn't have that star at quarterback that if you don't play the perfect game, you're not going to have a chance to win.
Yeah.
And that's the difference now between these two teams. And so, and in some areas, you could say Notre Dame is better than Clemson is in some ways, at least when they're playing their game. And that ultimately is what it comes down to, Sean. Which version of Notre Dame is going to come up? Because before we go into the Coach Mason stuff, here's my final piece to this. There's been a lot of talk about Notre Dame doesn't play at home, play well at home this year. What do they got to do differently to play better at home? I don't know if we know if that's accurate or not. Is it because they don't play as well at home? Or is it because this team plays to the level of their competition or the perceived level? I've had people say, well, Notre Dame doesn't play to the level of their competition. North Carolina hasn't – somebody has said this. North Carolina hasn't beat anybody, and BYU hasn't won a game since. You're missing the point. It's the perception that the team has about the opponent they're about to play. Ohio State, number 2 team in the country. You're going to be ready for that one.
Right.
North Carolina, 3-0, scoring a mess of points, high-octane offense, averaging over 50 points a game, averaging almost 600 yards of offense. You know that you're locked into that game. It's on the road. BYU, number 16 team in the country. It's the Shamrock game. It's the glitz. It's the glamour. It's the new – you're mentally focused, locked into that game. And then Syracuse on the road. Was it because it was on the road or because you're playing the number 16 team in the country? At home, you've played Marshall. Who cares? Right? You've played Cal. Who cares? You played UNLV. Who cares? And you've played Stanford, who stinks, who you've blown out. There's not a kid on this roster that went into that game that, except for Josh Lugg, like the 6th year, and Avery Davis, the 6th-year seniors. There was not a single kid on this roster that has played in a game against Stanford that wasn't a blowout. Because every kid that was part of the 2018, 2019, 2020, and 21 classes have all played against Stanford in games where they blew them out. They blew them out 38-17 in 2018. They blew them, was it 45-24 in 2020? Correct, or 2020, 2019. They didn't play in 2020. It was 45-24, and then of course last year they beat them 45-14. So it's just kind of like you're overlooking them. You're like, Stanford's no good. So Is it a home issue or a quality of the competition issue, and the lack of maybe leadership, maturity, whatever the case may be of that team? And we're going to find out what the answer is on Saturday against Clemson, because now you have the two worlds colliding. And so I don't know if it's necessarily a home versus away thing as much as this is the first actual good team you're going to play at home. And what will their mentality be like? So I'm very curious to see how that's going to play out, Sean, and what that dynamic is like.
And just before we go to Brian Mason, because I saw people in the chat talking about, I'm not sure we can run on Clemson.
First and 10, Syracuse.
And I'm sorry about that.
ESPN always does that, man. It drives me.
I had some video to accompany what I was about to say, but no. If you go, Syracuse ran the ball for 4.4 clip. Florida State ran the ball for 4.4 clip. Now, the caveat is they both had quarterbacks that could do damage with their legs.
Right.
But even if you take away the quarterback's yardage, the running back still averaged right around 4 yards per carry.
Right.
If Notre Dame averages 4 yards per carry, it's going to be a good night, because they're running the ball 30-plus times.
Right.
Minimum. Probably close to 40. That's going to be a good night against this defense, and they have to take advantage of the opportunities in the pass game.
Right.
We know that. We absolutely know that. I fully expect Notre Dame special teams to put their mark on this game in some way, form, or fashion, whether it's kickoff coverage, punt coverage, punting by John Sott, punt return. Something's going to happen. in special teams for them to make a mark on this game. So absolutely. That was the big thing that was confusing. With Syracuse being up to double digits, Sean Tucker had 5 carries. But guess what, Brian? He averaged 10 yards a carry.
Right.
So that's on Syracuse for not taking advantage of the opportunity they had. Notre Dame's not making that mistake.
Well, and the thing about Syracuse too is Clemson could scheme their defense to take Sean Tucker out because of how much read zone that they did.
Mm-hmm.
And you saw that, Notre Dame was able to attack them in a way where it's like they weren't worried about the quarterback pulling.
No.
Like they did a couple runs late, but they were shutting it down. Syracuse tried to go away from that because their quarterback was banged up, and Notre Dame shut it down.
Yeah.
And but that's not the only game, right? Because here's the thing, Sean. What we do, you and I have always talked about this, is you can't just look at one game and say, well, this is what happened on those 5 carries, and he averaged 10.8 yards per carry. See, running backs can go on it. It's not just that. The game before against Florida State, you talked about how Jordan Travis had a lot of yards. It was a legitimate runner. Jordan Travis ran for 64 yards that game. It's pretty impressive, right? Yeah. On 14 carries. Notre Dame doesn't have that. But Lawrence Toafili and Trey Benson combined for 137 yards on 18 carries in that game.
Yes, sir.
Right? And then you look at the rest of the teams they've played. They haven't really played a lot of really good running teams. And that's the other part of it is, they haven't really played like North Carolina State is 100th in the country in rushing, right? Wake Forest doesn't have they're 83rd in the nation in rushing. So when you look at the rest of the teams that Clemson has played, Georgia Tech's not a very good rushing team. They rank 96th in the country in rushing. Furman's a 1AA team. Louisiana Tech ranks 111th in the nation in rushing. And then you look at Boston College. They're really bad at rushing the football as well. They rank 131st in rushing. How many teams are there in college football, Sean? 131.
131.
Right? So they've played 2 teams. They've played 2 teams that rank in the top 40 in rushing. Now, Syracuse doesn't rank in the top 40 anymore because of Notre Dame, but they were ranked that high coming into that game. And that's Syracuse and it's Florida State. And then you look at what those 2 teams did to Clemson. Syracuse, like you said, only rushed for 124, but 4.4 carry. Their running back had 10 yards carry. But Florida State's the game I look to and say, Florida State went for 206 yards. And even if you take away the quarterback runs, their 2 backs combined, like I said, combined for 137 yards on 18 carries, Sean. That's a really impressive performance.
That's what I'm talking about.
That's averaging, I'm looking at now, 7.6 yards a carry. I just typed it in because I was trying to do math in my head and I couldn't figure it out. But you look at it and you say, man, this is one of those games where you say, Florida State was able to run on them. Well, Florida State has a run-throw quarterback, but they don't have the line that Notre Dame has. They have a good line, but it's not the line that Notre Dame has. So, there's a lot of things you can look at and say, hey, look, we've got to go do this. The opportunities are there. Do they have to play better than they did against Syracuse? Yes, they do. Mm-hmm. And that's why I wrote the article that I wrote today about Drew Pine and Tommy Rees and about, you got to switch things up to get that kid's mind right because you've got to get him back to looking like the kid that you saw against North Carolina and BYU.
Yeah.
And if you can get him back to being that kid, he doesn't need to be a world beater to beat Clemson.
No.
You just got to play your game. And that's going to be the key. That's going to be key to this, Sean. Next, I want to play what Coach Freeman said about Brian Mason because, Sean, we've heard all the stories about Brian Mason and how good of a job he's doing, how much the kids love him, and you see his energy on the sideline at games, and you see how excitable he is, and how the players respond to him, and he's such a break from what they had before. It's just night and day contrast in every way imaginable. But there were some other comments that he said about him that I thought were really interesting that I want to play now for everybody.
Yeah, I've worked with Brian Mason since 2011 when I was at Kent State, and we hired him as a defensive GA. And Mace has those qualities in terms of work ethic, intelligence, the ability to connect with players that you see here 10, 11 years later that, to me in my mind is he's one of the best, right? He does a great job. But why? Is because of his work ethic. Why? Because of his intelligence. Why? Because of his ability to teach and relate to players. You can have all these thoughts in your head, but if your players can't go out and execute it and have a belief in what you're presenting, you're not a great coach, right? You might be really smart, but coaches are as good as their players can perform. And that's what really, continues.
We'll run that back.
Because of his ability to teach and relate to players. You can have all these thoughts in your head, but if your players can't go out and execute it and have a belief in what you're presenting, you're not a great coach, right? You might be really smart, but coaches are as good as their players can perform. And that's what really, continues to make my belief in Brian Mason so strong. And you know what? He's continuing to get better. I mean, listen, you're not going to trick anybody. You've blocked 3 punts in the last 2 games, I think 5 this year. So, and it's not just punt block. I challenged the special teams unit in kickoff return. We had been below average in kickoff return. What you see last week, we got 1 opportunity and it came out for 30-something plus yards and could have went almost. We get 1 more block, it could go farther. And so that's what you love to see, guys that step up to a challenge, but also enhance the things they're really good at.
Now, I want to say something. I've had people say that was a shot at Tommy Rees. I don't think that's what it was.
Oh,
I think that's what he sees in Brian Mason. That was a guy that he went out and said that when he's putting his staff together, that's my guy. And we heard a lot of names about as far as special teams coordinators who might be interested in some guys who are bigger names than Brian Mason. But this was the guy that was always targeted from Marcus Freeman's side of things, the guy he wanted.
yeah.
And so I don't think that was a shot at Tommy Rees. But I will say this. Those are the things that he said after the Stanford loss that they needed to do on offense and defense.
Mm-hmm.
And that's exactly he says, look, we maybe got to scale things back. We've got to make sure that our kids understand what they're doing so they can go play fast. And that's exactly the deal on special teams. It's one thing for you to have all these schemes and all these plays. And this is because I could easily say that that's a silent dig at Al Golden. If we want to, think about who he's playing, who's he talking to, right? That's an issue on both sides of the ball. It's just a greater issue on offense. I don't think it was a dig at either one of them. I think it was a praise of Brian Mason, but there's a lot in there for the other 2 coaches. And I think when you break the film down, I don't think Al Golden is all of a sudden Clark Lee all of a sudden and just running a scaled down offense and just let your defense, let your guys go run. But he has taken some things away from checks and adjustments and just letting these kids play and more calls that tell them what to do as opposed to letting them read and react and think and flow and all that. And I think that's what we saw to a degree on Saturday against Syracuse offensively.
Yeah.
There were some things I would have liked to have seen this and I would have liked to have seen that. And there's certainly things that I did after the show critique and would have critiqued last night if I'd have done the upon further review. I'd like to see this. I'd like to see that. That's kind of what we do. But you can't necessarily say there was a million things in the offense that game because in the second half, they just lined up in 13 personnel the whole fourth quarter and said, we're running duo, try and stop it. And they couldn't. You know what I mean?
You know how hard that is? Like, let's not just gloss over that.
Yeah.
There are other big-time Division I players, Power 5 players on the other side of the ball.
Yes.
They're just not allowing you to do that. You are literally taking their will. I hear offensive linemen talking about it all the time. There's nothing better than moving somebody against their will. Like, I'm taking you here, and you're going to end up over there. And there's nothing you can do about it. And when we get up from this play, I'm coming right back.
Right.
We'll be right back.
That's soul crushing, Sean.
Yes.
I mean, and that's why, that's the thing is that's the statement that you make because here's the thing, you're not only doing it to Syracuse, but Clemson's watching that and they're thinking, man, we just played this team. Mm-hmm. We know who this team is. We know how physical because hey, look, that game was physical for Clemson as well. It
Clemson
wasn't like
do that from the jump.
No.
They couldn't do that from the jump.
No.
They had to wear them down.
Right. Notre Dame did that from snap 1. And so those are the things you look at, Sean, and you say, man, like, but my thing was going to be is this Clemson defense they know who Notre Dame is. I mean, who Syracuse is. They know the physicality and the quickness and the way that Syracuse played that game. And that's why they fell behind 21-10. They're going to watch Notre Dame do that and be like, man, okay, wow, like that's really that's impressive. They're going to see that and know like these cats are serious. So I think that's the thing is like, look, it doesn't matter how smart you are. It's your kids got to know it he also said, and there's got to be a belief in what you're doing. And that's one of the things I wrote in the article today is, I can hammer Tyrese all I want, and I will. But here's the deal. There are things that happen on Saturday that I'm not going to put on Tyrese's shoulders because at some point in time, Drew Pine's got to say, man, I got to make this play, right? And yeah, okay, maybe I wasn't given enough reps about something if I'm going to critique something, but I got to make that play. I've thrown 1 million screen passes in my life. I can't throw that ball at Lorenzo Styles' feet. I've thrown Michael Mayer 175 quick out cuts in the last 2 weeks alone. I can't miss that throw on 3rd and 3. And it comes down to it to where Drew's got to trust himself, trust his teammates, and trust the system to just say, go play, right? And you're seeing that on special teams. You're starting to see that more and more and more on defense. And now the final piece is getting the offense as a whole to buy into that. I think they've definitely bought into it up front and at running back. Like the running backs level of patience in the last 3-4 games compared to where it was early.
Yeah.
Like remember the big critique we had of Logan Diggs last year. And everybody knows I'm very high on Logan Diggs. Graded him higher than Audric coming out of high school. I said he was a top 150 kind of kid, borderline top 100 type of back. Love Logan Diggs. And he showed his talent last year. But the thing I said was him and Kyron both started developing really bad habits because of the line, where as soon as they got the ball, they were looking to bounce or cut. And we saw a lot of that from Logan against Ohio State, right, in limited snaps. But we started seeing that, over the next couple of weeks and even a little bit against North Carolina. But the last couple games, he's been so patient behind the line when he needs to be because there's a level of trust in his head that if I stay patient, these cats are going to show – they're going to open up the hole for me, and then I can hit it. Yeah. And when he needs to bounce it because the defense got through, he bounces it, and he's effective at it. But that's a big reason he's been so good the last couple of weeks is because you can just see he's playing with confidence, not just in himself, because Logan has never doubted himself, right. Which is that's a compliment, by the way, in case someone thinks I'm taking a shot or calling him arrogant. You can't play running back at this level or receiver or quarterback if you're not confident in yourself. But it's one thing to be confident in yourself. It's another thing to be confident in those cats in front of you blocking. And the way that him and Audric ran on Saturday and the way that Logan has ran really the last 2 weeks, he's running like a dude, like these cats are going to open up the hole and then I got to go do my thing. And it's really been impressive.
Yeah.
So I'm looking forward to seeing that against what is, in my opinion, the best front seven they're going to face all year. In my view, it's not the best defense they're going to face all year, but it's the best front seven they're going to face all year.
I like stepping out on a limb by myself. I don't mind. I'll step out there. I think they can be successful running the ball. I think they will be successful running the ball. And just like you said, this is the apex of defensive fronts this season. I will predict that they will roll the USC defense.
Yeah,
if they beat Clemson.
If they lose to USC, Sean, at the end of the year, it was only going to be in a shootout.
Yes.
If they beat Clemson. To your point, if
they beat Clemson,
if they
beat this, if they get the confidence of overcoming this defensive front, I guarantee you Lincoln Riley is looking at them like with the same mindset that Dino Babers has. Like he just happens to have an offense that can counter.
Right.
But the point is, you won't be on the field.
Right.
That's the whole point.
Right.
If you're going to be on the sideline, I'm telling you, this game is. We can't even describe the levels and layers of how important this game is, even with the disappointing season. And I'm glad this team is right where they are. I'm glad they're right where they are mentally. I'm glad they're ready to go. And like you said, Drew Pine, the offensive line. Look, Clemson's going to try to do some of the same things that Syracuse did. Syracuse came in with the game plan. We're going to take advantage of our big wide receivers. on Benjamin Morrison.
Sure.
They're going to try Bo Collins and Goddard. Clemson's going to try the exact same thing, right? Benjamin Morrison, he's going to be solid.
Right.
He's going to be exactly what he's been. Are they going to have some shots to get some balls? Yeah.
And they will catch some, just
And
like
they will
Syracuse
catch
did.
some.
They're going to catch
Yeah.
some.
Yeah.
But
you're not
what was
gonna get
Syracuse, Sean? What was Syracuse's completion success against Benjamin Morrison? For all the talk about him, they went 2 of 5, and if you count the interception that should not have been taken away, it's 2 of 6.
And
They
if
only
you
completed
listen
2
to
passes on him.
Marcus Freeman said he was playing bumper run.
Yeah.
We told him to bail.
So
That's
I
on us.
reached out to someone else about that to see if that was just coach covering for Benjamin, and I was told the same exact thing by another source. Like, no, that was our mistake. Like, we told him, and they didn't do a good enough job of explaining like how he should have bailed on that one. He bailed out, which is what you do to the field.
Yeah.
Whereas in the red zone, you're going to bail, but you're going to bail in to try to prevent that. It's a technical mistake that they just didn't. And I think part of that is he's such a mature player for his age that sometimes you assume, that you can say something to him that you could say to Clarence Lewis because Clarence is going to know what he means because Clarence has been through it.
Yeah.
Kind of thing. So, but how did he bounce back? Right. This is the thing is he and then like a series later, he gets a defensive pass interference called on him or defensive holding called on him.
Right.
You're thinking, boy, but after that, I really couldn't do a whole lot on him.
Yeah.
I mean, so it's that mental toughness that this entire team needs to start showing more and more of. He did it to a degree against Syracuse. Now they need to take it to another level because I don't know if playing the way you did against Syracuse is quite enough to beat Clemson. It's going to make it a 4-quarter game. I still think at quarterback, you need to make a couple more plays to be able to beat Clemson that you did not make against Syracuse.
Yeah.
But if you can, but it's going to be a game. Sean, that's going to do it for this portion of the Ivy Nation Sports Talk. We're going to have a rapid fire coming up next. But before we jump to that rapid fire, please make sure that you hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, hit that notification bell, subscribe to this channel, hit the subscribe button to CFB Nation as well. So we're hoping to have some really big news coming to our CFB Nation channel here very soon. I'm hoping very soon. Sean, hoping very soon. So we'll get to that. But up next, we're going to have our rapid fire. So, Sean, I gave you some questions for rapid fire tonight, and this is a segment. So I wanted to kind of keep this show as true to the way Sean Stiers does it, because honestly, that's the reason I hired him, because he does a great job, and I enjoyed doing the rapid fire the couple times I got to do it with him. There was one time I came on with him and Vince, and I actually was like kind of a co-host on WSBT like for an entire show.
Yeah,
it was a lot of fun, and the rapid fire was a lot of fun. So I wanted to do a rapid fire. So I called Sean. He and I talked through it. We got some really called Sean Stiers. We talked through some really good questions here for rapid fire. But I'm going to start the rapid fire off, Sean, with a question that I did not give you because we have a super chat that I think is a good question that we're going to start off with this. So we're going to kick the rapid fire off with a super chat question from Tyler Evans. I think this is a good one, Sean. This is a good rapid fire question. Who has more pressure going into this game, Notre Dame or Clemson?
Man, that's all about POV, point of view. Outside looking in is simple. Clemson has a college football playoff berth on the line. Like that doesn't get any bigger than that.
Short term or long term, I guess, is the way.
Yeah, it's win or bust. If Clemson loses this game, the season is a failure to them. Yeah, they can go on and still win the ACC championship, but if they lose this game with their soft schedule, they're not getting in the playoffs because they will probably be the worst or ranked worse than the other one-loss teams that are going to be there at the end of the season. So I would say Clemson.
Good. I think so, too. I think short term, I mean, especially with Coach Freeman being his first year, it'd be different if Coach Kelly was here. Notre Dame was in the same boat.
Yeah.
You say, you're in year 13 and you're having these issues, but under first-year coach, I agree with you. And also there's the mantra of, is Clemson really back or not, that people kind of have? And, you lose this game, and then all of a sudden, well, that's the first really good team you played, because now the close loss to Wake Forest doesn't look as good because of what Louisville did to them this weekend, right?
Yeah.
But, we'll see. So, Sean, we're going to talk a little bit of sort of national college football, Notre Dame a little bit as well on these. So first official rapid fire question. Who do you project, not who you think, but who do you predict will be the top 4 teams tomorrow night when they release the first installment of the college football playoff?
That's a good one, but I think it's going to be 2 Big Ten teams and 2 SEC teams.
Okay.
Michigan, Ohio State, Tennessee, Georgia.
Interesting. I think that here's what I think. I think they're going to go Georgia, Ohio State, Tennessee, Clemson is what I think they're going to do. Not in any particular. I mean, they could have Tennessee 2, Tennessee 1. But I think those are going to be the 4. I think Clemson and people. We had this discussion the other day. Part of it's going to depend on how the committee views certain teams because Clemson has 2 wins over top 20 teams going into last week, and now 2 top 25 teams. Michigan has 1. Right? Michigan's played really 1 good team all year, and that was Penn State. That's it. Clemson's played, 3 actually. Clemson's played, I believe, they've beaten 3 teams right now that are currently ranked. Florida State's back. Wait a minute. I don't think Florida State's back in the top 25. I'm sorry. But Florida State's been ranked at some point in time this year. But currently ranked, you've got Syracuse and Wake Forest are both still in the top 25, and Clemson beat both of them, plus they beat Florida State. So now here's my next question.
Yeah.
Would you have a different 4?
Heck yeah.
Okay. Who would be your 4?
I'm looking like, who do I think are the 4 best teams? I don't care who. These are the 4 best teams: Ohio State, Tennessee, Georgia, and Alabama. Alabama's better than Michigan. Alabama's better than Clemson. It's not even a question to me. Alabama, in my opinion, is the most. Dude, I just don't. I don't get how people just cast Alabama to the side. Like, you know what? We don't have to worry about them. Play that game. Play that game if you want to. Go ahead and play that game if you want to.
Texas played that game. Texas A&M played that game, almost beat them both times. Both teams almost beat them.
Yeah, but didn't we go down this road last year?
Which
didn't we go down this road last year? Where Auburn almost beat them. LSU almost beat them. You heard all that stuff in the middle of the season.
Yeah, but I don't think this team is that team, though. I don't think this team is that team.
Here we go again.
I think you have to take into account resume, though, because otherwise you could have Bama in if they have 2-3 losses.
See, that's why I said who I think from the teams I've watched are the best 4 teams.
Sure.
I'm not looking at resume.
No, I get that, but I think best 4 has to include the resume because otherwise there's never a justification for not having Alabama in the playoff. Even if they have 2 losses, you can have them in there because they still have a better, better than anybody in the country in most years. You have to still prove it on the field, and I just don't think this Alabama team has proven it. But I think as far as Michigan, though, I'm with you on the Michigan argument, Sean, because, again, I'd say, well, Michigan doesn't have a comparable schedule to where you could say, well, what would Michigan look like if they had to play Texas and Texas A&M and Tennessee and the teams that Bama's played? I'm right there with you on that one. I don't think Michigan is one of the 4 best teams in the country. My argument would be for Clemson, however, because I think when you look at Clemson, they haven't always looked sexy, but they've gotten the job done. They went on the road and they beat a Wake Forest team. We're handling Wake Forest early, and I think that's a quality Wake Forest team. What happened on Saturday was a fluke. 8 turnovers. That's a fluke. But still, it happened, right? But you beat a good Wake Forest team. You got up big. They rallied back. You took the lead late, and you got it done in overtime. You beat a quality Florida State team, who has a win over an SEC opponent this year. You had a convincing win over NC State, and then you had a nice win over a good Syracuse team. So, I think Clemson could play with Bama. I think the biggest difference between those 2 teams is a quarterback. That's still the biggest difference because if it comes down to 2 evenly matched teams and one team has Bryce Young and one team has DJ, I'm going with the team that has Bryce Young, just in my opinion. But I still think Clemson, when you include the resume into it, deserves to be in there.
I just have no respect for Clemson. I'm sorry.
You've never really had, or it's been a while, I should say.
I think they had 2 generational quarterbacks. Like their program was built, their success was built off 2 generational quarterbacks, and I don't want to be
I would argue 2.5
defensive line.
Yeah.
They had in 18 and 19 and 17. It was a perfect storm.
The one thing, can I disagree with one thing on there, Sean? Or not one thing, add in. I don't think Taj Boyd gets enough credit for laying the foundation.
When he laid the foundation, absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Taj is the one that beat LSU and Ohio State in bowl games before those cats even showed up.
Yeah.
Do you even get Deshaun Watson if he doesn't win those games?
No. And Deshaun
right. That's my thing. And so I think Taj laid the foundation, and that led to Deshaun and then Trevor And to your point, D-line as well. But they still have a really, really good defensive line this year.
Yeah. And
here's my next question, Sean.
Go ahead. Go ahead.
College football rankings come out tomorrow night.
Yeah.
It's going to be the first installment. They're only going to drop 4 of them, I believe, right? So I'm trying to think, 4 or 5 of them, before the final one.
Yeah.
Before the conference championship games. So, as you know, every year the college football playoff rankings cause ESPN talking heads to lose their minds when they come out with their rankings. And the most recent example that I remember is the one where they thought BYU was going to be a top 10 team.
Yeah. And
they were not anywhere close to the top 10. So we know there's going to be a shakeup in the rankings relative to what the AP and coaches polls are. Because one of the entertaining things from today's game, and I don't know who he was talking to, but Coach Freeman was kind of picking on a reporter a little bit, asking about his top 5, and the reporter was saying he had Tennessee 5th and Alabama 3rd.
That's funny.
Now, you and I could debate whether Alabama should be 4th or 5th, right? But
right.
I don't know if there's a debate that should have Alabama ahead of Tennessee.
No.
Right? And not just because of the head-to-head. Tennessee's got several impressive wins this year.
Yeah.
So I always find that funny, which is why I'm just glad those polls don't matter a whole lot. So there's going to be a shakeup in the polls. Here's my question. You also know something else. The committee will position certain teams in the polls to set up teams that are playoff contenders.
Yes.
With that being said, those two realities being said, do you think that there's a chance that Notre Dame could find themselves in the top 25 tomorrow, and why? Why or why not?
I don't think so at this time. And the reason I don't think so is you got to understand the bias that exists in this process. And they find every reason to put Notre Dame in when they're undefeated for reasons. And when Notre Dame doesn't have the leverage, they find every reason to keep them out. I'm just telling you from
what would be the
experience,
example of that? 2019?
If Notre Dame was a one-loss team this year, I promise you they'd be 5th. They'd be 5th. Yeah. And they would be trying to figure out a way, like, how can we make sure that they get in this playoff?
Well, that's why I'd say they'd be 5th, because you'd have Tennessee and Georgia and Ohio State and Michigan to what you projected, what you think it'll be. Well, those two teams all 4 of those teams play each other. Yeah. Right? Yeah. So somebody's getting knocked out and Notre Dame's getting popped in. There's no question.
I don't know if the Syracuse win is enough to apply pressure to put them in.
I think it's the combination of Syracuse plus North Carolina.
It could be.
Because North Carolina is also going to be in the top 25 tomorrow night.
Yeah.
It should be. They're 7-1, and their only loss was to Notre Dame. Here's why I think there's a shot that Notre Dame is going to be in. And first of all, the AP had them 30th. I mean, so people recognize that win. I think you're going to have the 2 wins over ranked opponents, and one of your losses is to the team that I think is going to be 2nd or 3rd in the ranking tomorrow, if not first. It wouldn't shock me if they put Ohio State first. But here's the reason I think they could have Notre Dame. It's not even about justifying Notre Dame's schedule or justifying. Because look, there are a lot of teams that are 6-2 and 7-1 that don't have the kind of wins that Notre Dame has over Syracuse and North Carolina. Right. For all the Notre Dame fans want to talk about the loss to Marshall and Stanford, the loss to Marshall and Stanford is why they would be in the bottom 5 of the ranking, not in the top 5 of the ranking.
Right.
Right. But there are not a lot of teams that have wins over a pair of top 25 teams, plus a 3rd team that was ranked when you played them and hasn't been the same since you physically beat them up.
Yeah.
Right. And so there's 2 reasons. That's reason number 1. Reason number 2, because as you said, I have always felt the committee was fair to Notre Dame. Even in 19, I felt that Notre Dame was fair where they should have been, because Notre Dame had 2 losses against ranked teams. The only good team they beat all year was Navy.
Yeah.
And then the embarrassing nature of their loss to Michigan, I was fine where they were. I actually thought Notre Dame was maybe a little higher than they should have been last year. But I think to your point, they were trying to create an opportunity where if, Georgia beats Alabama, then, you pop Notre Dame in there for the reasons we talked about. I think that putting Notre Dame in the top 25 helps Ohio State, and putting them in the top 25 helps Clemson, another team that the committee has always been very favorable to, even going back to last year. And then in 2017, when Clemson was the number 1 seed, despite losing to 4-8 Syracuse.
Right.
So I think that's the the second and the third reason why I think there's a chance you could see Notre Dame creep in there at like 23, 24, somewhere around there with their 5-3 record, is to bolster those two teams up more so than actually maybe necessarily thinking that Notre Dame definitely belongs to be in there. Here's the final reason. This is the committee that still is responsible for placement of the major bowl games. If you put Notre Dame in the top 25 now and they beat Clemson, you're going to have USC somewhere in the top 15.
Mm-hmm.
And then 3 weeks from now, they go beat USC. Now, all of a sudden, you have justification for that 9-3 Notre Dame team being in one of your bigger bowl games. So I think those are all the reasons that you could potentially see it. I'm not saying I would do it, but I could see it. I could see it. So that's
literally, when you say it like that, I can see them getting into the 24, 23 spot,
right,
something like that.
Yep.
And I really wouldn't have an argument against that. The crazy thing is, they beat Clemson, they would be top 15 at 6-3.
Well, we've seen the committee do that before, Sean. We've seen them put 3-loss teams. Remember the year Auburn had 3 losses and they were like creeping up on the top 10?
Yeah.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, they beat Clemson. Notre Dame's a top 15 team.
Yep. Next question, Sean. What is the biggest takeaway from the Syracuse win that you think could apply and impact Notre Dame in the Clemson game?
The attitude they played with. And I think it showed towards the end of the game. I think it showed towards the offensive line as they walked back to the huddle after each play in the second half. It's something that we said. I was waiting for Notre Dame to develop a healthy disrespect for their opponent. Like Marcus Freeman said it in the locker room. I was talking to Coach Babers on the field before the game. He was like, "Man, we've been waiting to get Notre Dame here." I'm like, "Okay, we're here. You've been waiting on us? We're here."
You may not want that.
I don't know, And it's the same thing. Like, okay, we're here.
His post-game press conference was strange. Did you listen to his post-game press conference?
I did.
It was strange. Here's another question for you, Sean. Okay, so we're getting ready for the college football playoff. We have 4 weeks left in the regular season, plus conference championship games, and we're going to have over the next month some huge matchups. You've got this weekend, you've got Georgia against Tennessee. That's a huge matchup. You've got Alabama and LSU, huge matchup. Notre Dame, Clemson, big matchup. In a few weeks, we'll have you're going to have Tennessee or Georgia, one of those two teams playing the conference championship game. You've got Ohio State and Michigan coming down the road here as well. There's going to be some big games coming up here, Sean, big rivalry games and opportunities for certain players. Somebody's going to make their Heisman statement here moving forward. So I'm going to ask you, Sean, right now, based on what we know right now and getting ready for this next month, who are you can invite 3 kids to New York for the Heisman finals. You can invite 3 of them. Right now, Sean, who are the 3 players that you are inviting to New York?
Hendon Hooker, CJ Stroud. You're only giving me 3.
Yes.
So many. You know what?
It's not an easy
I'm
one.
going to go ahead and bring a sleeper.
Okay.
In saying this name, I'm really predicting something in saying this name. All right?
Okay. Very interested.
You ready for the drum roll?
I am. Let's hear it.
Third guy I'm sending to New York is Illinois running back Chase Brown.
I knew you were going to go there.
Yes.
And I'm not hating it, but explain it, because that's a team that nobody's talking about that team right now. And they should.
What I'm doing is that they probably would be top 15 tomorrow night. I think they sit at 7-1. They face a distraught Michigan State team. They're probably going to destroy Michigan State at home this weekend, which was set up the big matchup. Back-to-back weeks, they played Purdue, and then they played Michigan. They beat Purdue, it's a wrap for the division. They go to the Big Ten championship game. But then they will have bigger fish to fry when they face the Wolverines. I think he's going to continue to put up massive yards. He's going to be the number 1 running back in the nation. And on top of that, I think they have a shot to pull off the upset against Michigan. because
I
they
don't
can
disagree.
be physical and run the ball. And they have the defensive backs to go man to man and stack the box and put a lot of pressure on J.J. McCarthy. I absolutely think it's possible.
Let's talk about the resume for Chase Brown. Chase Brown is currently the nation's leading rusher in yards per game, or total yards, with 1,208 in only 8 games. He's second nationally in yards per game at 151. Now, here's my only wish. I wish they would get him the ball more near the goal line, because he only has 5 rushing touchdowns. Now, he does have 8 total touchdowns because he has 3 receiving touchdowns. And I've noticed, too, Sean, the last 3 games, they're getting him a lot more involved than the past game, the last few games.
They did that against Nebraska.
That's right.
Yeah.
So I like that one. And to your point, I mean, the Heisman Trophy is about money games, right? Like, you've got to have that big moment in a big game. Right now, he doesn't have that because they haven't really played anybody. Nobody saw him just bully Minnesota, and he was the best back on the field that day. And you and I both love the kid that's playing running back for the other team. Right? Muhammad Ibrahim is that guy, right? He was the only reason they were even in the Indiana game, which is the one thing that I think hurts them. He was very good against Wisconsin. He has been an absolute horse for them this year, and he's doing it with Tommy DeVito at quarterback, right? So it's not like, Tommy's been a nice game manager, but he's not – no one's like, hey, let's not load the box because I'm afraid Tommy DeVito's is going to rip us apart.
Exactly.
Nobody said no defensive coordinator ever.
Mm-hmm.
Now, he's going to have that opportunity, to your point, Sean. He's going to have two potential opportunities to do that. And obviously, you talk about the Michigan game. That's going to be a big one. You've got an opportunity against a big-time team to go out there and do that, okay? But they also, like you said, Purdue is going to be one. But 2 weeks after the Michigan game, if they can handle their business and they got to go 3-1 down the stretch, or they just got to beat Purdue to clinch, right? Or,
yeah,
they just Purdue,
they beat Purdue. They beat Purdue. They won the championship game.
So if you handle your business, then let's say they do upset Michigan, you've got a chance in 2 weeks after that to play Ohio State in the Big Ten title game.
Now, the only reason I feel much better about the Michigan game than I would against Ohio State.
Mm-hmm.
And the reason I say that is I feel like, and Ryan can tell you this, the two cornerbacks that they have can match up against their receivers. And I feel like they can do
Illinois.
Yeah. I feel like they can do what Notre Dame kind of did against the passing game.
Mm-hmm.
Ohio State probably has a little bit more diversity.
Yeah,
with their running backs being able to come at you in ways. Donovan Edwards and Corum will probably do the same thing, but C.J. Stroud and J.J. McCarthy are 2 totally different beasts.
Yes.
That's 2 totally different beasts, and that would be the difference. C.J. Stroud, Tommy DeVito.
Yeah. Now, the question is for Chase Brown in this particular instance is, can they do enough to take the pressure off him? My point is, if they can play Ohio State tough, and if Chase can go for over 100 and kind of be the reason they stay in that game, that might be enough to get him in there at that point in time. But it's going to have to first start with Michigan. I'm going to give my 3, Sean.
Yeah.
Obviously, neither of us are putting Bryce Young in there just because of the missed time. He hasn't played enough this year.
Mm-hmm.
So first 2, I agree with. Hendon Hooker is right now sitting in pole position for me. C.J. Stroud is second. Part of the reason is since the opener, C.J. Stroud hasn't played a team that I really have a lot of respect for. Right. Penn State's good, but they're not. I mean, it's not going into Death Valley and shredding LSU. It's not playing Alabama and hanging a 50 spot on Alabama, right? He's my number 1. C.J. Stroud's my number 2. My number 3 guy, I'm going to go outside the box a little bit as well, and some people in the chat have already said it, Drake May. You take Drake May off that North Carolina team, and they're not sniffing 7-1 right now, in my opinion. I think he's put up great numbers. I think he is of the 3 quarterbacks that we've talked about, right? He's by far the most dynamic as a run throw guy, right? He's the best runner of all of them. I mean, Hendon will run, but Drake May is much more of a threat, in my opinion, to run the football. I mean, the kid's got 439 rushing yards this year, and 3 touchdowns. Notre Dame saw that firsthand when he hit several big runs against them. He is currently 4th in the nation in passing yards. He is currently 3rd in the nation in yards per game. He's ahead of both Hendon Hooker and CJ Stroud in yards per game by a decent amount. He also leads the nation. He's tied with CJ Stroud for touchdown passes this season. Obviously, CJ has more yards per attempt than he has. CJ has one fewer touchdown, but interception. But CJ's one. But also CJ's one fewer interception comes on less attempts. So Drake has thrown even fewer interceptions on it, from an attempt standpoint. So it's one interception different. But when you talk about a 40 gap in attempts, it's a much lower interception per pass ratio. And the other thing too is North Carolina has played some games where, like the Miami game, for example, I feel like Drake had a couple really bad mistakes in that game. He threw like interceptions, like back-to-back series. Then he rallied back and went over. Right. So Drake May is my guy for my third as of right now. Here's the only question, Sean. Does North Carolina have any spotlight games left that allow him to have that big moment game? They've got Virginia, Wake Forest, Georgia Tech, NC State. I just don't think that he's going to have that big moment. It would only have to – the only way he could do is if he just puts up sick numbers the next 4 games, which I think he'll do. He's going to have to go bonkers against Clemson. That's the only chance he has. And by then, some people are already going to put their votes in already before it. It's like people that send in their early, got election day coming up next Tuesday. The people that send their early votes in before the campaign's really fully gone and you've heard the debates and all that. Like, let's let the season play out. But I think Drake May for now would be my third guy. But I don't think, he doesn't have that Michigan game that Chase Brown has.
Yeah.
That big money opportunity. So that's it on that one.
Someone put they said Jalen Hyatt, who has had a fantastic year, but Hendon Hooker just kind of overshadows
And
Jalen
I think,
Hyatt has caught a lot of touchdowns, but Hendon Hooker has thrown all the touchdowns.
And he's been open a lot.
Yeah.
I mean, the part that's on him. I can't go there with him yet because if I'm going to go with a receiver as good as he is, Jalen Hyatt's been excellent. And the other thing too is he stepped up in a big way for a team that needed it because they've how many games in a row now have they gone without?
Yeah.
I mean, so Jalen Hyatt's been excellent. Just for me, if I'm picking a receiver right now, and I wouldn't pick a receiver this year, but if I had to pick a receiver this year, I'm going with Marvin Harrison. I think he's been consistently the better player between the two. Now,
outside of Notre Dame, sure.
Outside of Notre Dame, right? Correct. But there's a couple other games that Jalen Hyatt has to put up those numbers too. Now, here's the counter argument to that. Mm-hmm. Jalen Hyatt, without Cedric Tillman, hasn't had the counterbalance that you have to worry about that Marvin has when you talk about Emeka Egbuka.
Right.
So there's that too. So I think that could be the counter argument to why Jalen Hyatt would be in that conversation. But for me, there's just not that guy. There's not that receiver this year that's Devontae Smith. That's that kind of player for me right now.
Yeah.
So that's where I'm at, Sean. And now, final question as we wrap this up. Notre Dame has 5 blocked punts in 8 games. They've had 4 in the last 3 games, correct?
Yeah.
Does Notre Dame block another kick or punt, any kind of block, in the final 4 games of the year?
Yeah, of course. Okay. Of course.
Do you think they get one? Does the streak continue against Clemson?
I think Dabo is very well aware. But that cat Brian Mason is so good because if you really watch the blocks have come from 3 different areas on the line. Yep. It's not like they're running the same thing to get the block. So he might have another one in his back pocket that he hasn't shown yet.
Yeah.
But I thought Marcus Freeman, oh man, this is really smart. Coaches put things out there to let the other team know we're watching you. Marcus Freeman purposely put it out there. Yeah, we're ready for the fake.
Yeah.
Somebody's going to bring a fake. We're ready for it. He let them know, like, okay, you go ahead, try it if you want to. We'll be ready for it. So it's going to be interesting, but I think they get another one. I think Boston College is so bad, it has to come against Boston College. They're so bad.
Or Navy.
Yeah.
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 Now, here's the interesting thing, Sean, is Clemson actually has 4 blocked kicks on the year.
See?
2 blocked field goals and 2 blocked punts. So two very good special teams units.
Mhm.
Now, and Marcus Freeman has done it by hiring someone that he thinks is elite at it. Dabo is much more involved in special teams than normal head coaches, which is similar how Urban Meyer was. So it's going to be very interesting to see if those two teams who are good at blocking kicks, if one of those two units can make that a part of Saturday's contests. That's going to do it for tonight's show, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us on the IB Nation Sports Talk Show. Tomorrow's schedule, we're going to have 3 shows tomorrow. So we'll have our normal show at 1 o'clock. We're going to kind of introduce Clemson, kind of take a deep dive into this particular Clemson team, who they are, how they got here, what they do scheme-wise, what are things they do well, what things they not do as well. We'll have a show on Wednesday kind of talking about the stacking up. Thursday will be keys to the game. Friday we'll do predictions. But tomorrow we'll have our show at 1 o'clock. Then at 6 o'clock, Sean Stiers and Vince and Jesse, all 3 of your normal IB Nation Sports Talk people will be together at 6 o'clock. Then I haven't got the time yet. I have to kind of see what the schedule is for the college football playoff, but either 7:30 or 8 o'clock. We're probably going to go around 7:30. But that's why you got to hit that notification bell, Sean. We're going to have our post college football playoff ranking show. Whether Notre Dame is in it or not, we're going to talk about the college football playoff rankings. So we're going to get together, talk a little college football. We'll do that every Tuesday night after the rankings come out. And so we'll have that as well. So you're not going to want to miss it. So for Sean Davis, I'm Brian Driscoll. Sean Stiers will be back tomorrow, everybody. Don't worry. He's not going anywhere. He just had some obligations tonight. So asked me to fill in for him, which I gladly did. So thanks, everybody. Have a great night. And thanks for joining us on the IB Nation Sports Talk podcast.